Welcome back to the Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
I'm Phil.
And this is a podcast where we journey chapter by chapter through C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. This is chapter 13 of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Deep Magic from the Dawn of Time.
From the dawn of time.
There you go. Phil, we're back, dude.
We're back.
Yes, and we have another special guest with us. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Emily, and I'm excited to be here.
Yes, so we have Emily, who is actually my sister, and so this is going to be really exciting. Hopefully we won't bicker too much. I'm hoping not.
I know.
It's
Our
been
true sibling
yeah.
attitudes will come out.
We've already had quite the intro here, and hopefully we've gotten all of our sibling rivalries and stuff out of our system, so we can just engage with this beautiful text. So, Phil, would you like to remind us where we left off with chapter 12?
Sure. The Pevensies had arrived at Aslan's camp.
Oh yeah, and we learned all about the sword cleaning, right?
Oh yeah.
So,
Gotta always clean your sword.
Yeah. Did you look into this at all to find out anything more about it? Or maybe even Emily, do you know anything about cleaning your sword?
I know nothing about cleaning your sword.
I think there's a lot of iron and blood, and then it can rust the blade, maybe. That's my guess.
Oh man, that's it. Yeah, so that's what they mean when they say iron's in your blood. Is that what an anemic person is? Kind of like
they got
Wolverine?
Cut with the sword?
No.
Is Wolverine anemic? I think he's the opposite of anemic.
I think that's adamantium, so it's different than iron. All right, we're getting way off topic. All right, well, listeners,
Wait, serious question though.
Yeah.
Which is stronger, vibranium or adamantium?
I think it depends which studio head you're asking. If you ask Marvel Studios, Kevin Feige over at Marvel Studios will say vibranium. And if you ask whoever leads the Marvel movies over at Fox, they'll say adamantium. Whichever rights they own, they're going to tell you that's the best one.
What if one company buys another company and then they have both for the first time?
So do you guys have any corrections?
Emily's moving us on.
We have to admit, this is why Emily's here.
Yeah.
Keep us on track.
I don't think we have any. Have you listened to our last episode, Emily?
I did listen to the last
Did you have any corrections for us?
Nope.
Great. Then you said you liked my Gandalf voice from a couple of episodes ago. That was the only, and I think she was making fun of it. So.
I was making fun of it.
Yeah. All right. So we have, like Phil said, the Pevensies have arrived at Aslan's camp, and Peter has defeated Malgrim, and we're now going back to how things have been going on for Edmund. So I have the chapter summary here. You guys ready?
I'm ready.
Open conflict is drawing closer as the witch orders her servants to be gathered and prepared for battle. The witch also decides that killing Edmund is the best way to prevent the prophecy from coming true. But just as he is about to be executed, a portion of Aslan's army rescues Edmund. Unfortunately, the witch and the dwarf escape, hidden by magic as a stump and boulder. Back at Aslan's camp, Edmund has a conversation with the lion alone. When he returns to the pavilion, he apologizes to his siblings and is forgiven. Shortly, the witch approaches the camp for a word with Aslan. She cites the deep magic and claims that Edmund's life belongs to her because he is a traitor. Aslan acknowledges the validity of her claim, but asks for a word in private. After their conversation, the witch renounces her claim on Edmund's life. So we have a tension-filled chapter today.
It sure is.
What were any of y'all's big takeaways before we kind of dive into our read through here? Did you all have any big takeaways from the thing? Mine was just that this was a really, really tense chapter.
Yeah, I think this is a turning point. We learn a lot in this chapter, and so much happens in such a short period of time.
Yeah. What about you, Phil?
I noticed how everything seemed to be getting worse and worse, and then Edmund is rescued, and you think, oh, okay, finally, this is getting a lot better.
Yeah.
But then things get even worse when the witch reveals that she has a claim to Edmund's life. And then there's a solution reached, but we don't know what it is, and that produces even more tension.
Yeah. That's true. And it's so up and down, this whole thing. This is a really great chapter. I mean, we're now in this third act of this book, and it really just keeps getting better and better until we get to the end. So we're in an exciting time in the part of the book. To start us off though, we start with Edmund really at the end of himself. I think you guys mentioned that the first sentence reads, "Now we must go back to Edmund. When he had been made to walk far further than he had ever known that anybody could walk, the witch at last halted in the dark valley, all overshadowed by fir trees and yew trees. Edmund simply sank down and lay on his face, doing nothing at all, and not even caring what was going to happen next, provided they would let him lie still. He was too tired even to notice how hungry and thirsty he was. And so, I mean, we've really come to Edmund's at the end of himself. And as I was thinking through this, I made a connection that I hadn't made before. And that's that Edmund is really given up. And I was thinking about, growing up in Christian community and how often we get to hear people's testimonies of kind of, how they came to walk with the Lord. And I thought a lot about how often you hear someone's testimony. It's not, not everyone's is like this, but this is definitely a similar kind of thread in many people's testimony, that it's not really until they come to the end of themselves that they were able to see their desperate need for salvation. And so I think we're finally getting to the point where Esmond has really realized how deep of a mistake he's made. He's like, I've given up. He's completely given up at this point.
Right. I also love that simply sink down and lay on his face doing nothing at all. I think almost everyone's had a day like that where you just walk in the door. You don't even take your shoes off. You just lie down face forward on the bed and don't move for a while.
Yeah. Any takeaways for you here?
Yeah. Edmund has just gotten to that point where what he put his hope in is failing him. So he has lost all hope in the witch at this point. And I think the last thing he's going to expect is for somebody to come rescue him.
Oh, that's a really good point.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we're seeing how foolish he was to think that she would be his savior in this world. And so the witch and the dwarf, they kind of talk through what to do next. We heard the prophecy back in chapter 7 or 8 about those 4 thrones at Cair Paravel. And she's like, hey, what about if there's only 3 people to fill them? That really wouldn't fulfill the prophecy. And so they come to the conclusion that it's time to execute Edmund. And there's that interesting line where the dwarf says, it won't be long now before the stone table can again be put to its proper use, said the dwarf. And we can't get into this too much because a lot of the stone table stuff is going to be for next chapter. But my question is the stone table just for sacrificing? Because, I mean, not to move on too far ahead, but we all know what's coming in the next chapter, I hope. So we know that the stone table is going to be used for a sacrifice. So, and the dwarf is kind of alluding to that here as well. So, do you guys know anything more about that?
I'm pretty sure that right here, it sounds like they're going to use the table soon, right?
Yeah.
It was a little confusing because he says it will be a long time now before the stone table can again be put to its proper use. So I wasn't sure if he was saying we're going to use it right now, but then it's going to take a while to recharge or whatever.
You got to plug it back in.
That's right. Like a Tesla.
Well, I was thinking about doing this for the next chapter, but I might read a little bit about it here. Because I think our next chapter has so much coming in it that I think we can maybe we can pull a little bit of that into this chapter since we get the mention of the stone table. And I'm going to read from Paul F. Ford's Companion to Narnia, his entry on the stone table. The great grim slab of gray stone supported by 4 upright stones. It is carved all over with strange lines and figures that might be the letters of an unknown language, and which cause a curious feeling in onlookers. Its history is unknown, and it seems to have existed forever. According to the White Witch, it is the proper place for killing and the place where killing has always been done. Although its size is not mentioned, it must be a low table. And then there's some more stuff there, but we'll get into that in our next chapter. But it seems as if we don't really know the origin of this table.
I think she's also ready to kind of get rid of that idea. Like when it came to her being really desperate that they just have to get rid of Edmund, she was going to kill him right there while he was...
And she doesn't care.
Yeah.
That's good.
And we'll get to this in just a bit, but the witch in a very shrill voice does give us a little bit of a hint to where the table may have come from.
So, but yeah, before we get to that, a wolf rushes up, the wolf from the last chapter who kind of escapes after Peter kills Malgrim. And there's a sentence here, I have some questions for y'all, and it says, at that moment, with a rush and a snarl, a wolf rushed up to them. And the word wolf is capitalized. And so I would love to actually go back, and maybe we've just missed this, but are all talking beasts capitalized? Right? Because there's definitely other places where we see animals and they're used just as like common nouns, right? They're not capitalized, but this wolf is capitalized. Or is this just kind of C.S. Lewis's way of writing to tell us, no, this is just, this is a certain wolf. This is the wolf that we saw from last time. So that's why we're kind of giving it like a proper noun place. What do y'all think?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking that maybe if we just called him Wolf, it would make sense as to why it was capitalized. But it does say a wolf.
I know.
So, I don't know. And all the other talking beasts we're really familiar with, like Mr. and Mrs. Beaver. It's their name.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Phil?
I think that from what I remember and just taking a quick glance at the next chapter, everything is capitalized.
You think so? Okay, that's good to know. We also had a listener email kind of along these lines. And again, if you have thoughts about this, and we've really loved our listeners who've reached out and shared these kind of tidbits with us, especially kind of filling in the gaps in our knowledge. But listener Josh emailed us kind of right after we did chapter 7, after he listened to chapter 7, A Day with the Beavers, and gave us some insight on our discussion over why they were eating trout. Like, what's that about? Like, these are animals. Like, are they eating other talking animals? And he made a really good point. He pointed to one instance in the silver chair, which is probably my favorite part of the book, or at least one of my favorite parts, and an instance in The Magician's Nephew that really kind of fill in these gaps about talking beasts versus non-talking, normal animals, I guess, right? Yeah. So thanks again for that, Josh. And he brought a lot of good points. I can't read them here because Phil doesn't know what happens, and I don't want to spoil it for him. So let's move on. What happens next, guys?
They tie him up to a tree.
Yeah, he gets tied to a tree, and do you think if you're reading this for the first time, if you're reading this as a child, like, are you worried about Edmund, and do you empathize with him? Or are you just kind of like, good, he's a jerk,
No, I think you feel really bad for him
Yeah.
at this point.
What do you think, Phil?
Say, now it is time to tie it to a tree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's completely wiped of all of his dignity.
Right. No, I don't remember where I found that. They're tying it to a tree.
Yeah, they're tying it to a tree. It's like, that's his humanity. It's gone now. Are you upset, Phil? Or are you just like, you don't like, how do you feel about Edmund is my question.
Yeah, I think that because he's hit such a low point, we are starting to feel a little bit more sorry for him.
And he is just a kid.
Yeah, that's true. I
Like,
always
he's
forget.
a little kid.
Yeah, he's a child, and he's who's made one bad decision, and it mostly was for candy. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
I think we tend to kind of assume people are older when they do worse and worse stuff. So can you remind me how old he is?
I think he's 10 years old.
Yeah, I'm picturing like 15 when he gets in this much trouble.
Yeah, and he's a child.
Yeah. I
think I do that a lot of times when I read books of children's literature too, where by the way, yes, he is 10 years old. Where I kind of put, and I think this is actually a symptom of really, really strong writing, is that as an adult, I am still putting myself in Edmund's shoes here. And so therefore I'm going, yeah, Edmund is an adult. He has the exact same cognitive skills as me, and the same cognitive development. Yeah, and experience. And it's like, no, he's a little kid. He's like the students I work with, and who can be really susceptible to making poor decisions. And it's not even always reflective of their character. It's just impulse or other things,
Right.
But luckily at this moment, as Edmund is at his lowest and about to be killed, we get the rescue party. So C.S. Lewis writes this: "At that very moment, he heard loud shouts from every direction, a drumming of hoofs and beating of wings, a scream from the witch, confusion all around, and then he found he was being untied. So he's saved."
But if you read too fast, you miss that.
Yeah, I mean,
it all happens in like one paragraph.
That's true. Yeah, it's quick.
Yeah, it doesn't ever state that he was now safe. It's just like then he found he was being untied, and then there's strong arms around him. They're giving him wine. They're trying to steady him, and then they lost the witch.
And to be honest, this is why I love using this book in my classroom, is because it really pushes you. Like, and it doesn't always hold your hand. Like, if you're reading this as a 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old student, it doesn't say anything about him being saved. You have to figure that out because of what happens. It's kind of that. It almost sounds cliche, but it's so often true. It's the show, don't tell, right?
Right.
And that works really well here.
I think it's a great transition book from, books that say, and then the, noun did this, whatever it is. And then now you have to infer a little bit more. It also works in this passage because it communicates the speed with which everything happens. Like,
absolutely.
He probably was halfway back to Aslan's camp before he realized that he was like actually freed and that these people were on his side.
Yeah.
I actually read this book to my students as well. I teach 3rd grade, and because everything is happening so quickly, my kids are usually on the edge of their seats because if they zone out or get distracted for 30 seconds, they've missed an extremely important part. So it actually encourages my kids to pay attention.
So do you read this out loud, or do y'all read it as a class? Because my kids are
I read it out loud.
Okay.
So my kids are only about 8 and 9 years old. So this is just a read aloud. It's just for fun.
Yeah.
There's no work that goes with it. My kids actually usually free draw during.
Oh, that's cool.
So
have you got any sweet pictures?
I haven't kept any.
Oh,
they must not have been that
I hope
great.
none of their parents are listening. She's like, just throw them all away. They're garbage.
But I usually tell them to work on their visualizing skills to draw what they hear.
When you do that next year, I will find. Yes, please do, and we'll post some if we get permission. We'll post some on our social media of I want to see an 8-year-old draw Mr. Tumnus without ever seeing a movie or a picture.
Right.
Like, what do they Don't show them the book. What do they think Mr. Tumnus looks like? Because I actually think it would be very frightening. Like, if you really just picture this half goat, half man, and you've never really seen that before, he's very frightening. No offense, Mr. Tumnus, I apologize. You're not really frightening, just maybe to human children.
Or real.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So a very interesting thing happens here, Phil, and I think you have a section of the text to read. Do you want to do that?
Sure. It was perfectly still, and presently the moon grew bright. If you had been there, you would have seen the moonlight shining on an old tree stump and on a fair-sized boulder. But if you had gone on looking, you would gradually have begun to think that there was something odd about both the stump and the boulder. And next you would have thought that the stump did look really remarkably like a little fat man crouching on the ground. And if you had watched long enough, you would have begun to see the stump walk across the boulder, and the boulder sit up and begin talking to the stump. For in reality, the stump and the boulder were simply the witch and the dwarf. For it was part of her magic that she could make things look like what they weren't, and she had the presence of mind to do so at the very moment the knife was knocked out of her hand. She had kept hold of her wand, so it had been kept safe too.
That's awesome. I know she's the bad guy, but that's super cool.
Yeah, that's a super cool skill, but it's also very well described, where it's like, it looked like this, and then a little bit later it looked like this, and it's a slow transition, and you kind of realize, like, oh, I wasn't really looking at that the way I thought I was.
Well, I just want to know, at what year of Transfiguration do Hogwarts students learn how to do the stump and the boulder? Do you think that's like a 5th or 6th year thing? They don't do full animals till I think 6th year.
I was thinking, I just recently watched The Two Towers.
Okay.
And Frodo has to pull his little elvish cloak over Sam because he's stuck. And it turns into a little rock.
Yeah.
Actually, a very large rock.
It's great. This is such a. I just think magic in general just is the coolest thing, and whether we're talking Harry Potter, whether we're talking the Legendarium of Middle Earth, or this is just really cool. Like, this is a super cool thing, and I think it's also interesting because this kind of magic is not. I made the joke about Transfiguration, but this isn't just they were fully transformed. It almost seems like she had made them look like it, but it's more of like her shifting, like it still says
perception.
Yeah, exactly. It's like in reality they still were this, but if you were looking, your perception would be wrong, and so that's like, is she doing magic on your brain? Like, that is really cool.
And I love how Lewis says, if you had been there. First of all, I get mad because I'm like, man, I wasn't there.
Do you want to be?
If
There's a
only
bunch
I
of
was
people
there.
just fighting.
I'd like to be watching,
Okay.
not involved.
From a safe distance.
From a distance. But then he says, like, you would have seen this. I don't know. I think he does a really good job at putting the reader
Oh, yeah.
into the scene.
I mean, he knows the exact right moment to break the fourth wall. Like, to go, okay, great, here's the aside to my readers. Just a reminder, you are reading a book. But he does it in this way where it doesn't take me out of it and go, oh, yeah, this is just a story. It's like, oh, my goodness, this is so real. Why am I not there? Right. And I think there's a fine line between it really could pull you out of the story, but he somehow, through his genius, breaks the fourth wall to then bring you further into the story, which I just think is incredible.
Almost further out and further in?
Yeah, exactly. Which you still don't know what that means.
Yeah, I really look forward to finding out.
I know everyone ends their emails to us further up and further in and feels like I have no idea what that means.
Why is everyone saying the same thing? It's super weird.
Oh, man. You got a long ways to go, buddy.
Oh, dear.
So let's move on from here because we still got a lot to cover in this episode. And we're now getting to a point. So Edmund returns back to Aslan's camp. And there's an interesting thing that happens here. This is now, he has a conversation with Aslan. And this is the first of 2 times in this chapter where we have a conversation that is
no idea what
yeah,
it was.
It's extremely important.
It happened in silence,
and we have no idea what's said.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Maybe the 2 most important conversations of the whole book, Edmund's forgiveness, and then this deal that Aslan makes with the witch. We actually don't know what they say, which there has to be. Like C.S. Lewis had to have done that on purpose. It's not just like he was like, oh, I've been writing a lot. I don't really want to do. I don't want to.
Yeah.
I don't want to have any more Edmund dialogue or something. Why do you guys think that is?
I feel like those conversations were so important, and they both involve Aslan. That C.S. Lewis almost, I don't know if this will make sense, but didn't want to put words in Aslan's mouth. That they were so important that C.S. Lewis almost was like, I don't want to get this wrong, or I don't want to say something that Aslan really wouldn't have said.
Okay.
And I think also a lot of it leaves it up to the reader to kind of decide what was discussed.
I think that's the key, is leaving it up to the reader. Whatever the conversation is going to be better in my head and my imagination than if it was explained. But he also does give enough details that you have a sense of what the conversation could be about, where you're not just imagining anything.
It's almost kind of like J.J. Abrams did a TED Talk probably over a decade ago at this point.
The Mystery Box?
The Mystery Box. Do you know what this is, Emily?
No.
So it's still related, but it's not quite the exact same thing. So J.J. Abrams, director of Star Wars: The Force Awakens, and the first 2 the newer Star Trek movies. And he also started a lot of TV shows. He wasn't the showrunner, but he started Lost and Fringe and I think Alias and stuff. And he has this TED Talk where he talks about the Mystery Box. And he gave the talk, I think, in the middle of while Lost was airing on television, kind of in the middle of it. And he was no longer involved with the show at all, but still his name was just attached to a lot of stuff. And I won't spoil Lost at all. But there's a lot of things you don't know in the show. You're kind of unraveling things slowly, and there's a lot of mysteries to it. And he talks about this mystery box that he got when he was a kid, at a magic shop. And I haven't seen this in a very long time, so I might get some of it wrong. But he talks about how he's actually never opened the mystery box. It says mystery box, surprise inside. He's because at this point, nothing inside could ever come close to his wildest dreams of what was in there as a kid, as he got older. It's it's actually better not knowing what's inside. And a lot of times that when we do finally find out what happened or, what is inside this box, we're disappointed because our imagination has taken us further. And so I wonder if it's almost one of those things where what's actually important is just the fact that they had the conversation, not necessarily the conversation itself. What's more important is the conclusion or the solution that comes out of these conversations.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And I'll put a link to that TED Talk in the description below. It's a really great thing.
We know that in Aslan and Esmond's conversation, there had to be some aspect of forgiveness. And that Aslan doesn't want Edmund's past mistakes to stay with him moving forward. And we know that when Aslan says, and there's no need to talk to him.
You're not going to do an Aslan voice?
Past. No, I'm not doing that.
Sorry, say it again. I interrupted you. Read it again.
No, that was it. I just hear Liam Neeson.
Why is that?
Well, he did the voice.
Yeah, he did the voice. Okay. Wait, do you not know that?
Well, I guess that was the case, but I haven't. I'm trying to stay away from the credits until we finish the.
Okay.
I don't want to picture the. No, I don't want to picture the faces, the voice part.
Yeah.
I wasn't. Because Daniel brought up Liam Neeson before, too.
Leonardo DiCaprio plays Peter, so I think you'll really like his portrayal. He doesn't know. I can say whatever I want. Yeah.
I know that's not true.
Natalie Portman did a really great job as Susan. I was really impressed with her performance. It was really great.
No, she's not allowed to do that, no.
I thought it was weird that Chris Hemsworth was Mr. Beaver. I thought that was a weird... that was,
I have to be honest, though, I do think of the cast from all the Marvel movies in a lot of these roles.
Really?
Yeah, I just I think that would be a really good fit.
I don't know about that. We'll have to wait till we get to the episode about the Disney adaptation. We'll walk through our dream casting or something.
I think that Chris Hemsworth would do a good job as Aslan.
Really? He's too funny for me.
Well,
Emily's making a face over here. She's not happy.
I can see it because I think Aslan would have a little bit of a sense of humor.
Yeah, I think so too.
Like a quiet sense of humor. You'd really have to get to know him.
I don't know.
Actors can do different roles than the one thing they're known for.
Oh, no, I know that. I know. It's hard.
No, Chris Hemsworth can only be Thor.
Yeah, he can only be Thor and the secretary in the Ghostbusters reboot. That's all right. He can be. All right, so let's move on. So the witch sends a messenger that she would like to have a discussion with Aslan, and Aslan allows this, and then we get this.
No, he allows her with the condition.
Oh, what was the condition?
She cannot bring her wand. She has to leave it at that great oak.
Smart.
That great oak.
If you were just watching The Two Towers recently, there's that whole part where Gandalf, and it happens in the book too, where Gandalf has to leave his staff when he goes to see King Theoden after he's under Sauron's control. So I guess that's another kind of one of those magic, rules about magic that just go across, everything. We all know these. We have these rules. We all understand about magic. You want to separate the person from their wand at all points.
But not in Harry Potter. They have to have their wands at all times.
Oh, that's true.
Otherwise, they're nothing.
Well, does the witch have to have her wand?
Which story are you talking about?
This one. Sorry, we've been talking way too much different kind of fantasy things.
We just went from the Two Towers to
can
Harry
the witch
Potter right back to Narnia.
Can the witch do magic without her wand?
I think it's it has to be a control thing, where it's just she has more power with the wand. I guess
that's fair. All right, so she agrees to come, and then C.S. Lewis writes this. A few minutes later, the witch herself walked out onto the top of the hill and came straight across and stood before Aslan. The three children who had not seen her before felt shudders running down their backs at the sight of her face, and there were low growls among all the animals present. Though it was bright sunshine, everyone felt suddenly cold. The only two people present who seemed to be quite at their ease were Aslan and the witch herself. It was the oddest thing to see those two faces, the golden face and the dead white face, so close together. Not that the witch looked at Aslan exactly in his eyes. Mrs. Beaver particularly noticed this.
I love her cameo right there.
Yeah. So what happens next, guys?
I love this part. He goes, or the witch says, "You have a traitor there, Aslan." And Aslan's response is so good. He goes, "Well, his defense was not against you." I want to be that calm in how I interact with people all the time.
So it's a hard role to live up to if you're trying to be like Aslan, but I think that's a very wise thing. Because, you're right. He's, even in this whole exchange, this is where it gets really tense because, then the witch says, "Have you forgotten the deed of magic?" And then I love Aslan's like, "Let's just say I have forgotten it. Maybe, And and he asks her to tell us about this magic. And to be honest, I was, as we were preparing for this, we really can't talk too much about it without moving forward, right? Like, there's not much we can say about the deep magic right now. I definitely have a lot for the next chapter. But are there any things you want to say about deep magic, Phil, before we move past this kind of quickly? Not because it's not important, but because we need the full context of the next 2 chapters to discuss it.
Sure. Well, one thing I thought Lewis did really well here is the witch goes, "Have you forgotten the deep magic?" And you could be like, "Oh yeah, I don't know what that is. Like, please tell me what the deep magic is," and like have a very obvious exposition setup type thing.
Mm-hmm.
But Aslan's response goes, "Let us say I have forgotten it. Tell us of this deep magic." He's not saying he doesn't know it, but he like very smoothly sets it up for the reader.
Yeah.
And then when he does describe it, it's like written in letters deep as a spear, and as long on the firestones of the secret hill, referring to all these things in the witch's response that we don't really know, but it kind of is very has a lot of great images to go along with it. Like letters in stone that deep, that's insane.
Yeah, it's really cool. And what's interesting about this exchange too is we kind of feel like some of this is out of Aslan's control. There's that interesting thing where he says, "It is very true. I do not deny it." When she talks about the fact that the witch says, I have to have, his blood, or else what? It's like all of Narnia will be overturned and perish in fire and water. And so this is kind of frightening for us because Aslan was supposed to be the savior of everything. And he's like, no, yeah, I can't control this. This is out of my hands. Paul's.
It's like no matter what, or no matter how powerful Aslan is, and even the witch, they both still answer to a higher control or a higher magic.
Yeah, that's right.
Deeper magic.
A deeper magic.
Wait, what? You got to
From
stop.
the dawn of time.
Phil, if you've been reading ahead.
Oh, is that ahead? Dang it. I did read ahead because this book is getting better and better as it goes on, and it's harder and harder not to go forward.
Well, and there's also that interesting line where Aslan says, Susan says, can't we do something against this deep magic? He's like, work against the Emperor's magic. And, no one makes that suggestion to him again. So this is also just really good world building on C.S. Lewis's part because we are recognizing there's actually a lot of stuff that we don't know about this world.
Right. Oh, so where is that part where he says...
It's in chapter 13.
Page 156, Phil.
We have different books. It doesn't work.
I listen to your podcast.
Oh, that's true.
Phil has the one that has all the books in one.
In the right order, according to the publisher.
Don't do that. Please don't upset our listeners.
Okay, here we go.
Susan screams, "Oh, Aslan!"
Mm-hmm.
He goes, work against the Emperor's magic. And nobody ever made that suggestion to him again. I love how final it is. The first time I read it, I accidentally read, no one ever made any suggestions to him again.
No.
Ever.
What a great leader he is, right?
And it shut down that dialogue.
I think the most interesting reaction to this entire tense exchange is Edmund's, who is on the other side of Aslan, and C.S. Lewis says he's looking all the time at Aslan's face. He felt a choking feeling and wondered if he ought to say something, but a moment later he felt that he was not expected to do anything except to wait and do what he was told. He's not Edmund's only thing that he's done is actually made all this have to happen, and he's actually not going to play a role in his own salvation.
And he kind of senses that and doesn't say anything.
Yeah, I mean and this also, what a great character moment for Edmund to have some character development here and show maturity and just kind of saying I'm sitting this one out. A lot of times that's a lot of maturity to know when it's not your turn, and this is not his turn.
Right.
All right, so to wrap up this chapter, there's one last conversation we've got to talk about. Do you want to read that, Emily?
Yeah. Lucy said, "Oh, Edmund," and began to cry. Peter stood with his back to the others, looking out at the distant sea. The beavers stood holding each other's paws with their heads bowed. The centaurs stamped uneasily with their hoofs, but everyone became perfectly still in the end, so that you noticed even small sounds, like a bumblebee flying past, or the birds in the forest down below them, or the wind rustling the leaves. and still the talk between Aslan and the White Witch went on. At last they heard Aslan's voice. "You can all come back," he said. I'm not doing his voice. "I have settled the matter. She has renounced the claim on your brother's blood." And all over the hill there was a noise as if everyone had been holding their breath and had now begun breathing again, and then a murmur of talk.
I tried to put that last part in my own words in my notes, and I just ended up writing, "There's no better way to write that."
Yeah, it's so
He
well
found
done.
the best way, as if everyone had been holding their breath and had now begun breathing again.
I mean, we get it. Like, this is suspenseful, man. Like, there's so much happening here, and yet we don't know what's said.
Yeah.
Like, we know probably what the deal is, but we don't actually know how that conversation is happening. And I think an interesting kind of thing to point to is Pauline Bain's illustration, which I don't know if you can see this, Phil, because I know you only get one illustration per chapter. But I have Emily and I are looking at a picture of the witch and Aslan kind of walking. We just see them from behind. Aslan's got his hands behind his back. Do you see that?
Yeah, I do have that.
So I have a silly question and then some serious questions. One, does Aslan just walk around like a human? Is he is he a biped? I know we've already had this discussion, but I always,
I respectfully disagree with this illustration's
Okay.
representation of Aslan.
It does look a little weird.
It looks weird,
It
but
does look a little weird.
my serious question, Aslan looks almost dejected here. I mean, and I think we've kind of come to the conclusion that we feel like the illustrations add to the story, but they don't necessarily, they're Pauline Bain's interpretation of the story.
Right.
So it doesn't necessarily mean that's exactly what's happening. And I don't see in the words or in Aslan's reactions that he's dejected. I mean, he's definitely upset, but I think he almost looks defeated here. Or, and so
He looks like he got arrested instead
Yeah.
of walking pensively.
Yeah.
And he's obviously very distraught.
Yeah. So what is he distraught about?
Whatever decision they're making,
Ye-
whatever conversation they're making, it obviously looks like something that he doesn't want to do. I don't know. His head is lower than hers is, though.
I know, that's so interesting. I almost think though he's more distraught over Edmund. It's almost more like that this had to come. He's sad about what has already happened. He's not necessarily sad about what's going to happen. I'm sure that he's not happy about it, but it's more like he's sad about what caused us to get to this point. That's maybe where he's so upset.
Yeah. Man, you can tell a lot just looking at the back of a lion's head.
Yeah. But yeah, this is again, I think it's very wise of C.S. Lewis to not actually give us what happens in that conversation. We don't know.
Yeah.
So we move on from there. Aslan returns. Like we said, everyone kind of breathes, and the witch asks him how she'll know that he'll keep his promise, and he just roars at her loudly, and that's the end of the chapter. So
No. He doesn't roar at her loudly. He roars at her, and it grew louder and louder and louder. I love that.
And she runs away.
Yeah.
And she picks up
Picks up her skirts
I just imagine picking up the hem of her robe and scurrying off with her,
Yeah.
with her little dwarf.
almost tail between her legs. What were you gonna say, Emily?
Wait, I just picture her with her dwarf running after her.
Yeah. Let's get out of here.
So, I mean, this is a pretty big cliffhanger. More so than some of the other chapters we've had. We end this chapter not knowing what happens next.
Right.
We know that Aslan made a promise, and that he's going to keep it, and the witch seems satisfied with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is really just discontentalizing. How do you say that?
That's not a word, dude.
It is now.
Makes you
I will make it a word.
discontent.
It's really disconcerting because the witch is happy about something, and she hasn't been happy about anything that's been good for everybody else up until this point.
That's good. Any other final thoughts before we wrap the chapter up?
It is a little concerning that the next chapter is called The Triumph.
Oh,
of the
man.
Witch.
It's not good.
So you're like, oh, that's not how I thought that was going to happen.
Uh-oh.
So we end right with the witch has renounced her claim on Edmund's life. after this private conversation, and we turn to the next page, chapter 14, the triumph of the witch. And in this chapter, Aslan meets the witch at the stone table. So it's not like necessarily a fun chapter to look forward to.
Right.
All right, so we'll end on that kind of downer note, and we got some more downer stuff coming as well too. But thank you all so much for joining us today. This has been just a really great chapter. Thank you, Emily, for joining us.
Thanks, Emily.
Before we wrap up, we have a question for you. It's the same question we asked Sarah Jane. Do you remember what that was, Phil?
Do you prefer cake or pie?
No.
I know the answer is pie.
Correct. Yes, there's one correct answer. It's pie. Tell us a little bit about your relationship to these books.
Okay, that's not as scary as I thought it was going to be. I know that I read these as kids. We both did.
Yeah.
This is actually our mom's favorite series. And she read them all the time to her own students.
Family of educators.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh.
And she read them to us. And I don't know, I just always remember being familiar with this story. I know Daniel has said before, we grew up in a Christian home, and we're both Christians. And so I think we're drawn to this series for who C.S. Lewis is and the story of Christ and its connection with these books.
Yeah.
So I don't think I ever had an experience where I found the books and I just fell in love. The books were just kind of always around for us. And I think we just always loved them. We did watch the BBC special a lot.
We watched it so much as kids. I can't wait till we cover it.
Here's a question. How did you obtain a copy of the BBC version?
The library, right?
I have no idea.
I'm pretty sure we got it at the public library.
Okay. I got mine from the church library. That was just...
maybe it might have been the church library too, actually. We got it from some kind of library. Here's the harder question, though, Emily. What is your favorite book in the series?
Oh, man. I love the story of Prince Caspian.
Interesting. Okay.
I do love the story of Prince Caspian. But I haven't read that in a while.
Like, how long is a while?
Oh, like middle school.
Okay, so
school.
like a very long time.
Yeah. But I recently, like within the past couple months, reread The Last Battle.
Okay.
And I'm like kind of on a Last Battle high right now.
So you understand what further up and further in means?
Yes.
Sorry, Phil. So right now it's kind of between Prince Caspian and The Last Battle?
Yeah, I have like a recent favorite, and then one that I just always remember has been my favorite.
Okay, cool.
But I'm most familiar with The Lion, the Witch, and the
Yeah,
Wardrobe.
I think that's pretty fair. I think that's the same for a lot of people. So, listeners, you can continue following us into Narnia on our Twitter or Facebook pages. If you have any feedback, you can email us at thenarniapodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 406-646-6733. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the book and on our show, and we've really enjoyed getting those, and it's been really great. We talked about that in just a couple episodes ago. We'd appreciate a review on Apple Podcasts if you have a moment. This helps other listeners find the show and join in on our read-through of the book. Also, make sure you subscribe to the show in whatever your favorite podcast app is so you can wake up every other Wednesday with a new episode. Lastly, the show's themes were created by Kevin MacLeod. You can find more of his work in the links in the episode's description. All right, well, thank you, Emily, for joining us. Do you have any last departing words before we go? Or
Thank you for coming along on this journey, and we will be back next time for Chapter 14, The Triumph of the Witch.